Please welcome Acting President Claire Shipman and the Director General of the World Trade Organization and IGP Carnegie Distinguished Fellow, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala.
Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to the World Leaders Forum. I'd like to open by thanking our guest of honor for being here, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. We are so grateful that the Director General of the World Trade Organization is spending some time out of her busy schedule with us today. I also want to recognize our esteemed moderator, Merit Janow, former Dean of our School of International and Public Affairs. Merit, thank you for being here. I also want to thank Colombia's Institute of Global Politics, which is co-sponsoring this event with us. The Director General is an economist and international development expert who was appointed head of the WTO 4 years ago. This month, she began her second term in the role. She is the first woman and the first African to hold this position. I'm going to applaud for that myself. She came to the WTO with decades of experience at the highest levels, including service as Nigeria's finance minister and its foreign minister. She also worked for 25 years at the World Bank, where she rose to become the second most senior person in the organization. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Economics from Harvard, a PhD in Regional Economics and Development from MIT. That is impressive. I wish we had a Columbia degree there, but let me get to the next part. I should also add that she is currently a Carnegie Distinguished Fellow at Columbia's Institute of Global Politics at CEPA. And in this role, we're lucky because she will be participating in campus events and programs as she is today, meeting with students and faculty and contributing to ongoing policy-relevant work happening at the Institute. The Director General's here in New York at a moment when the issue of global trade is dominating headlines, of course, in this country and around the world. She's spoken candidly about issues like tariffs and the effect they have on globalization and its critics, and the challenges facing her organization. I know we would all like to hear directly now from the Director General, so let me welcome her to the podium. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, and good morning, or is it good afternoon to everyone? I'm so happy to see all the smiling faces here. I just want to thank the leadership of Colombia and of CEPA for having me here, and also having my old friend, Merit, to have a conversation with me. I'm deeply honored to be part of the Colombia World Leaders Forum and to have been named a Carnegie Distinguished Fellow by the CEPA Institute of Global Politics. Colombia is home to one of the leading academic exponents of free trade, and today I'm going to talk to you about fixing the global trading system. But one of the proponents, University Professor Jagdish Bhagwati, and to one of the most thoughtful critics of the global economic system, global economic order, my friend and former colleague at the World Bank, University Professor Joe Stiglitz, and his wonderful wife, Anya. So nice to have you there. And of course, Colombia is home to top-notch legal scholars like Merit. Some of you know the WTO system very well. I think something that all of you would agree on is that the global trading system is facing its most serious crisis since the Second World War. Unilateral US tariff actions over the past 6 months have shaken confidence in the generally open markets that businesses and consumers have come to take for granted in recent decades. More than a few commentators have proclaimed the WTO's demise. Such claims are nothing new. Obituaries for the multilateral trading system date back at least to the 1980s. That said, We know from history that a total trade breakdown can happen. It happened during the 1930s with calamitous consequences. I always say, we've seen that movie before and we don't want a rerun. Reruns of bad movies is not a good thing. So to understand where things might be going requires us to look beyond the headlines and look at the data. And what the facts tell us is that the trading system is very much still there. It is battered, it is bent, but it is not broken. The unilateral tariff actions have had a substantial impact. But if you think WTO rules have disappeared and trade has reverted to some sort of Hobbesian state of nature, you are wrong. About 72% of global goods trade is still operating on core WTO, most favored nation tariff terms. This is largely because of two things. First, the USA accounts for about 13% of world trade. So nearly 87% of world trade is among other WTO members. And second, because WTO members have continued to trade among themselves on basically the normal WTO terms, whilst to their credit avoiding tit-for-tat escalation with the US. So others trade among themselves on normal terms. They've not taken unilateral actions, and they've also not done a tit-for-tat with the US. We worked very hard on those two things. It is true that the most favored nation share was over 80% at the start of this year, pre-tariffs, and it may yet dip further. We have to see how WTO members handle the diversion of China's trade from the US to other parts of the world. Evidence of this diversion is becoming clear as US-China trade contracted by 19% year-on-year between January and July, according to US Census data. Thus far, we have advised WTO members to handle this by using the array of trade remedy tools available in our basket of trade measures, rather than indulging in a set of unilateral actions. And so far, they seem to be doing that. But what is clear is that the WTO system is showing considerable resilience, that it is providing global trade with a stable core within what I think of as an unstable equilibrium, because we'll be dealing with uncertainty for some time to come. Sometimes we just don't know what decision is going to be taken from one day to the next, and we'll have to live with that uncertainty, including with respect to trade, for some time to come. The stability and predictability the WTO provides goes well beyond tariffs. Our agreements in areas like health and safety standards, customs valuation, and intellectual property, to name just a few, set out shared rules and practices that enable value chains to function. These continue to deliver predictability to companies, to consumers, and to countries every day. But let me be clear. None of this means that the status quo can endure. We must admit that the trading system is under pressure from three things. First, external perceptions of having left poor people behind in both rich and poor countries, and hence a populist backlash. Second, internal contradictions from the implementation of some of its rules. And third, the rise and spread of fast-paced technological change. So we must ask ourselves, how did we get here? Part of the answer of that is that a great deal of what is blamed on trade has to do with technological change, inadequate domestic social policies to handle the outcome of trade, and macroeconomic imbalances in big economies, low domestic consumption in China, and big fiscal deficits in the US. Nevertheless, there is no doubt that the trading system itself needs deep reform. Successive US administrations have for years made reasonable criticisms about the WTO rulebook. And while one may not agree with the current unilateral approach of the United States, complaints about inadequate policy, transparency, unfair trading practices, and level playing field issues need to be addressed. I share some of those criticisms, and I think they are valid. Moreover, The US has hardly been alone in voicing concerns about the world trading system. Several developing economies have long complained that the WTO system delivers too few benefits for the most vulnerable and allows too many farm subsidy-related market distortions. Many say they need more policy space to industrialize and create manufacturing and good jobs for their people. And based on some of the policies we see now, more than a few advanced economies seem to be feeling the same way, interestingly. A particularly salient concern that I see is that the trading system has now built in some troubling dependencies, in my view. Over-dependence for some on the United States for market demand, and on China for critical supplies. The trading system was built for interdependence, not over-dependence. If we want global resilience in the trading system and political harmony, this system has to recalibrate. Given the widespread desire for change, WTO members can and should use the current disruptions as an opportunity to deliver long overdue reforms that can modernize and reposition the system. As I see it, reform would have three elements, and these three elements are also the three objectives I have for my second term, which I just began a couple of weeks ago. I must be a masochist, right? The first is to preserve and strengthen the parts of the multilateral trading system and the WTO that are working well. And we've heard that a significant portion of the trading system is working well. For example, the body of rules that ensures openness, predictability, and stability of the system whilst rewarding innovation. Each year, for instance, our agreement on trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, or TRIPS, ensures more than $500 billion, $500 billion in royalty payments for patents that incentivize research and innovation. I'm sure many of you don't know we have this TRIPS agreement that helps generate such tremendous amounts. Almost one-third of that goes to US companies. So last year, US companies got $144 billion in payments as a result of this agreement. Second, fix and modernize the parts of the WTO that are not working. For example, tackle unfair trading practices and subsidy rules to level the playing field, and take into account new areas like green subsidies, which don't feature in the present agreements that we have, and which are quite legitimate in my view, given that climate change is an existential threat. Tackle issues of declining transparency and notification, and also work on policy space for poor countries to industrialize. And I could go on with the list of things that need to be done in that regard. Modernization would also mean steps to ensure that our treasured consensus-based decision-making system, where each person, I'm quite proud of this, at the WTO, the voice of the smallest and their weight counts the same as that of the largest member. And we practice unanimity in consensus making. It's probably the only organization that does that. So small countries feel they actually have a voice, which they don't elsewhere. This is great. But what we don't want is that this treasure of a decision-making approach becomes a paralysis on decision-making and coming to agreements within the system. So we need ways to reform this, to practice it in a practical way that allows us to move forward nimbly. One way forward would be to make it easier to bring new plurilateral agreements into the WTO rulebook. This would let coalitions of willing WTO members negotiate new rules in areas like investment facilitation, as they're doing, or in digital trade, like our e-commerce agreement, which others would be free to join in later when, or if they choose, or not join, as the case may be. A wider array of negotiating instruments would make for a more agile and a more flexible WTO, which is needed for the future. This repair modernization agenda would include reform of our dispute settlement system that Merit knows so well, the only one of its kind in the world for adjudicating trade disputes. This system functions now with a great deal of creativity from members because we have our appellate body, the second tier, frozen. So members have gone to great lengths now to find other ways to settle and agree on disputes. But we need to see that these new approaches and this new creativity can be assessed and properly put in as part of the reform. The third element of the reform sees new and emerging opportunities in trade. There are exciting opportunities for which the WTO may need to make new rules or provide an environment of predictability and stability for business. Services trade is growing faster than goods trade, projected to grow by over 4% in volume terms this year. Digitally delivered trade is growing at 8 to 10% per annum. Digitally delivered services trade, growing at 8 to 10% per annum and was worth almost $5 trillion last year. Green trade is now worth almost $2 trillion. So there are exciting things happening in trade. It's not all gloom and doom and pessimism. And what I want us to do in this reform is focus on those areas and those opportunities and how we can make sure that poor and developing countries also benefit from them. Reforms like these are possible, but will require a large dose of political will that can only be provided by ministers and leaders. Ambassadors in Geneva are working hard to tee these up and see what these reforms could look like. Here in New York, I've been engaging with leaders on where they need to exercise political will to get the work done. The critical time will come at our 14th Ministerial Conference next March in Cameroon, where ministers will have to, in my words, roll up their sleeves to debate, work on, and endorse these reforms. Can we do it? The answer is yes. And I feel we really don't have a choice. As I say repeatedly, the status quo is not an option. The good news is that WTO members just showed that they can deliver together by working hard to ensure the entry into force last week of the WTO's first sustainability agreement to curb $22 billion in harmful fisheries subsidies that contribute to depleting our oceans through illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. I am very proud of this agreement. It took 22 years to negotiate. When I came to the WTO, I saw that we had this agreement that they've been negotiating for years. In 1970, 7% of our oceans were overfished. By the time I got there, it was 38%, according to FAO numbers. And I said, are we going to wait until the oceans are completely overfished before we get this agreement into force? What will young people, like many of you in the audience, have if we leave you depleted oceans? And so I'm very proud that last week we got it there. And we will now curb harmful fishing and over-depletion of our oceans. Let me conclude on a personal note. These are very stressful times for many people, myself included. It feels like every morning I wake up, there's some new challenge. But again, for me, it's an immense honor to be at the center of a key issue in the world, a key issue that the world is grappling with, and to try to see how we at the WTO can contribute solutions that would benefit people and planet. That makes me want to jump out of bed, at least 70% of the time, racing to my job. There's always that 30% where you don't want to get up. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Well, thank you so much. It's an enormous pleasure for me to have these few moments to have a conversation today with Director General Ngozi, and I'm so pleased that you're also a IGP Carnegie Distinguished Fellow and will be back on campus. We'll talk for a few minutes, and then, as our custom, we'll open it up for students. So students, please prepare yourself, and we'll turn to you shortly. Let me also remind us all that any speaker on campus is welcome and is not to be interpreted as an endorsement of the speaker's views, but a welcome to join our community for this discussion. So you've outlined a very ambitious set of things for the WTO today, and I think you've conveyed tremendous sense of urgency on dealing with the concerns of many countries that are long-standing and a number of intractable issues that the WTO has faced for a very long time. And some of these issues, like subsidy reform, they will take many years. And maybe others could be achieved in a shorter period of time. So, and meanwhile, the world is not sitting still. And I see that clusters of countries are trying new arrangements, new regionals. I think more have been born in the last 6 months than we've seen in a very long time. So I'm wondering how much urgency you see out in the world. You've conveyed a lot, but how much do you see in the world? And do you think there are other ways to advance towards expanding the issues you've said if the WTO can't move as quickly as it needs to?
Well, thank you, Merit, and it's a pleasure to be with you. I see a great deal of urgency. I mean, the world is changing by the minute. We have the changes brought by AI and other frontier technologies, quantum computing. All these are going to bring great differences and changes to our lives. Actually, I thought it's so important. Our World Trade Report, which we just released last week at our public forum, it's on AI and trade. And before that, I had set up a new unit that we didn't have on AI and frontier technologies to look at what would be the impact of this on the trading system. And if you have these kinds of changes happening, the WTO and the World Trading System cannot afford to take too much time to solve the problems or to sit still. You can't be sitting still when the world around you is changing. If you do that, you'll be left behind. So yes, that's why I think there's a sense of urgency to tackling these issues. And I have some optimism. Some of the issues will take time, but we have to, and I'm speaking out quite considerably, that status quo cannot be an option, because there may be some members who may think that, oh, 72%, okay, we're okay, we don't need to do much. Absolutely not. If we don't carry out these reforms, I feel that 3/4 of world trade will be further eroded. So that's why I feel a sense of urgency. Now, how can we do it? You said many new agreements are taking place, countries are getting together. And we support that. We support that because we don't see that as a threat or challenge to the WTO. We see that if you look at most of these new agreements, if not all, are built on the WTO platform. You know, Merit, we've got a whole division that looks at FTAs, the free trade agreements, the regional, and they're almost inevitably built on a platform of WTO rules. So we don't see them as competition. We welcome them. So let's make these agreements. The second reason why we welcome them is is what I said up there. I think there's too much overdependence that is coming into the world trading system. And we actually need members to diversify their trade, okay, not concentrate. I look at some countries and they have the bulk of their markets in the US, or they depend on China for the bulk of their supplies. That doesn't really make for global resilience. So I think for these reasons, we welcome this. Now, how should we do it? I think that willing coalitions of members should come together and try to solve some of the problems. And we should have the flexibility within the organization to have what we call plurilateral agreements. It was built for multilateral. Everybody must join in. We did have some plurilaterals in the beginning that are quite famous. But more and more, there was this reliance that the multilateral instrument is the only one. And I'm saying no. With what is happening now in the world and the fast pace of change, we need agility. So if a group of members want to come together and put an agreement together to solve a world problem, why not? And others can join when they are ready.
Well, thank you so much for that. Of course, I would like to keep going for another hour or so, but we have 1,000 students here. Could you please invite students? We have people with microphones. Please be very brief, ask a question. I will take at least 2 or 3 at a time, so we'll try and get to as many as possible. So if you'd like to go forward, please go up to the mics and we'll go from there. You're welcome to introduce yourself if you'd like, but again, very brief and actual question. Let's get started. Over here, please.
Thank you to Director General. Good morning. My name is Sherry Chen. I study economics, political science, and I want to serve as the Secretary of Defense of the United States.
Oh.
And my question today is about the global supply chain because it is increasingly tied to national security. So how do you see the World Trade Organization balancing open trade with the rise of security-driven export controls and industrial policies?
Great question. Thank you. One over here, please.
Hello, my name is Pumelele from Eswatini. Okonjo, the troublemaker, as well as your name, given to you by the opponents in Nigeria. How important is it to be a troublemaker in order for you to get where you are right now?
Fantastic. Let's start there.
Okay, I should take that.
Take them both.
Okay. Let me take the global security and export controls question. It's a very important question. And I think that that is one of the things we have to look at the WTO. It's going to come up in the reform, because one of the things that you can invoke in trying to justify unilateral actions or any actions is a national security concern. And you can say, I did this because of national security. So increasingly, or you can put export controls and say, look, when it's challenged, you say, you invoke national security concerns. So it's becoming a handle to try to excuse or, cover several actions that members might take. Sometimes it's genuine, okay? So I'm not saying that they're not genuine national security concerns. But I think WTO members have to bite the bullet and try one more time. They tried to define that, when in our judicial system of the trade court, what it meant, and it didn't go very well, and led to a number of I don't like calling them judgment, or decisions that the United States, for instance, didn't like. I think that in the reform process, we have to grapple with this question again. What can be a national security concern? How can you evoke it so that it can be used properly? And I think it's going to be one of the most difficult things. Because, it can be a slippery slope, right? Health is a national security concern, isn't it? Education, I was in cabinet as a finance minister for 7 years. I can just imagine how in cabinet, if you gave that, each cabinet member can find a way where their portfolio is a national security concern. So I think we have to work on that. So I'm concerned about it. It is squarely in the sights of the things we have to reform, and it's going to be one of the most difficult.
Thank you.
On the issue of how important is it to be a troublemaker, Okonjo-Iweala, that's what they used to call me. Absolutely. I think sometimes you just have to speak up for what you believe in. You've got to operate on certain values and principles, and you have to know who you are. It doesn't matter to me if people praise me outside, but when I get inside, I don't feel good because the values and principles on which I think one should operate, I've not carried them through. So when you see those values and principles being challenged, whether it's when you're fighting corruption, whether it's an issue of trade, whether you're talking about climate change and whether it exists or not, when what you believe in, you should be very clear about what you believe in. And once you know that you're clear, you have clarity, then when you speak up or you fight for it, then sometimes people say you're a troublemaker. But if you're a troublemaker for the right things, why not?
Thank you so much. Let's take a few more questions, please.
Hello, Director General. My name's Mohammed. Thank you for coming here today. I really admire your journey. You've broken multiple glass ceilings to be where you are today. My question is about, critics often argue that the WTO favors wealthy nations and corporations over developing countries. How do you respond to that criticism, and what steps is the WTO taking to overcome it? Thank you.
Thank you. Over here, please.
Thank you, Director General, for coming here today. I'm a student at the Mailman School of Public Health, and my question is about your experience on the boards of Gavi and COVAX. One of the things we're noticing is the United States, which is one of the largest donors for both these programs, has withdrawn its funding, leaving countries even more vulnerable in terms of vaccine supplies. So my question to you is, how can other countries and international organizations encourage the kind of multilateralism seen in trade in terms of vaccine supply as well as financial resources, as opposed to relying on a few large donors?
You know, as time gets shorter, I might have more people say a word and then you can answer. Could we take one more, please?
Hi, thank you for being here, Director General. My name is Adachi Amaram. I'm pursuing a Master's in International Affairs. First, I want to thank you for being not only a manifestation of excellence, but also a trailblazer for Igbo women like myself. Igbo Kwenu. I want to...
Kwezuenu. Say it again.
Igbo Kwenu.
Kwezuenu.
My question is regarding, do you have any advice or best practices for those of us from the Global South that want to break barriers that most of the leading voices are, they don't look like us? Like, what advice do you have for us to stay grounded as purposeful in that endeavor? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Okay. Over to you.
Okay. Yes, the criticism that WTO favors wealthy nations and hasn't done enough for developing countries, I alluded to it. Actually, when I competed for this job of the WTO, and which was one of the most rigorous competitions I ever went through, a pure competition with 8 other candidates, and I got the job, one of my sons said, well, Mommy, how can you do this? How can you go and work for the WTO? Because so he challenged me. He also believed that WTO doesn't favor poor countries and so on. But I opened the book that founded the WTO called the Marrakesh Agreement. And I showed it to him that what attracted me to the WTO is its founding purpose. The WTO's founding purpose says that it is there to enhance living standards, to help create jobs, and to support sustainable development. This was in 1995. And I thought, what could be better than that? This is to serve people and planet, and that's what I'm interested in a multilateral. And therefore, if this is not happening and people don't know, we must try to go there and try to see what we can do. And it is true that there was the Doha round of the WTO, Doha development round, because the WTO was created by a group of 23 countries who were mostly rich and well-to-do countries, and they were around the table, and many developing countries that are members today were not there. So we have to admit that their interests may not have been fully taken into account. So there was this idea of having the Doha round, which was called a development round, to try and take more of the developing countries' interests into account, but it broke down and was never completed a couple of decades ago. And there's a lot of resentment on the part of developing countries. And many of them do say, you can look at the Africa's trade. Africa's trade has been stagnating around 3% of world trade, below that for quite some time. And trade of least developed countries the same. So they have grounds to say, well, this system isn't working as well for us, and we have to look into it. You also get rich countries where people have been left behind, where jobs have been lost. And they also feel resentful. But I want to say 2 things. You heard me there. Not everything blamed on trade is caused by trade. Some of those job losses you see, yes, some came from losing some manufacturing jobs, but some came from technological change as well. But all that is blamed on trade. Now, also, active labor market policies or domestic policies to try and help those who have lost jobs and retrain, in some countries, they're much better than in others. And it happens that, you know, if you look at the Scandinavian countries, they spend a decent amount of their GDP on these policies, and you don't hear as many complaints. In some other countries, including here in the US, not enough. So it's not just dumping on trade and saying that there are also things. Trade cannot solve everything. But that being said, what we need to do is not brush aside complaints. We need to look clinically at what can we do better. There are provisions within the WTO for special and differential treatment to allow developing countries to have a bit of space to implement agreements, to help them to do things differently, to help build their capacity. How can we increase those things? Developing countries also have to look at themselves and say, what do we need to clean up here to attract investment, better domestic investment, regional and foreign investment, in order to create supply chains to add value to products from developing countries. We're not going to trade more if we keep selling just commodities that don't have value added to them. Neither will we create jobs. So we need to look at domestic behind the border policies as well in order to improve things. So working together, I really feel more optimistic that we can try to clean up those things. But policymakers have to accept that they have a role. It's not just the WTO that is going to be able to do that. And then Gavi and COVAX. Yes, I spent 5 years of my life working on chairing the Gavi board and helped to develop COVAX, so that when vaccines, when we had the pandemic, developing countries could get vaccines quicker at affordable prices. It didn't quite work out exactly the way that we thought. But what we saw during the pandemic has really convinced me of one thing. Having 80% of vaccines manufactured and exported in 10 countries in the world when you have a pandemic doesn't work. It is not building global resilience. It didn't work. We don't want poor countries were at the back of the queue in spite of everything we tried to do during the pandemic. And people were dying when we had the technology to stop it. That really hurt, okay? So we mustn't do that again. What we need to do is working with Gavi, we still need Gavi's ability to procure globally and to reduce prices. But we now need to also work with Gavi and others to decentralize the manufacturing. Pharmaceutical supply chains must be decentralized. Africa cannot import 98% of its vaccines and 90% of its pharmaceuticals. That doesn't work. So that's what we are focused on now in trying to bring us together. And there's actually a high-level panel working group on this set up by the G20 that is trying to work, and WTO, we're working actively on trying to help with decentralization of pharmaceutical supply chains. So let's work together because there'll be another pandemic and we don't want to repeat the same mistakes. We also need to encourage countries to put more of their domestic resources in pharmaceuticals and not be over-reliant on external resources, even though a pandemic is a global public bad and no one country can solve it. But I think countries also need to put more money in preparedness and prevention. So I think a whole constellation of approaches have to be put together to work with Gavi, the Global Fund, and others to solve the problem. Advice for those wanting to break through. We could spend a whole day on this. I don't have much to say, except I really see young women and men of today, and I'm full of admiration because they have so much spirit. They're not wanting to accept, what was accepted before. Look at what happened in Bangladesh, where I just came from a meeting with Mohammed Yunus, by the way, before coming here. It's students who took to the streets and said, no more, and we want you to be the leader. So what I would say is that for someone who doesn't look like everyone else, and I think I'm the example of that. I don't look like everybody walking down the street. And I've always been looking like this most of my career because this is the way we dress and I feel comfortable in it. It is two things. One, again, coming back to what do you believe in? What do you want to achieve beyond yourself? What's your purpose that you're seeking to help with? And second, how do you want to do that? Once you've got, and how hard are you willing to work to achieve what you want to achieve. I find that if you believe in something, you're seeking to achieve something, and you know what you're talking about. That's what I say, particularly to women. People forget very quickly that you're a woman, you're black, you're African. They listen to what you have to say. So you absolutely need to know your material, master your material, know what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve, and pursue it relentlessly. Will you always succeed? The answer is no. I've encountered a lot of resistance, a lot of failures even, and so on. But I always bounce back. I'm probably living in the eye of the storm as we speak on the trade issues, and it's not easy. But I'm trying to see what are the opportunities in the crisis that we're in and lead the organization in that direction. So never give up. Know what you're talking about, please. Don't talk nonsense if you're trying to work on an issue, okay? Especially if you're a woman. I actually wrote a book about it with Julia Gillard, the Prime Minister of Australia, who is my friend, called Women and Leadership, Real Lives, Real Lessons. Because we saw from all these women leaders, they were encountering the same thing. Master your material, believe in yourself and what you're doing, and don't listen to anyone who is trying to divert your attention.
Well, thank you. You are giving us tremendous advice in so many dimensions. I know our time is short. Let us just hear one or two other thoughts from our students and then let you share your final thinking. Over here, please.
Hello, my name is Ophélie Caveng. I feel especially privileged to be able to address you today. I've had the privilege of interning at the WTO this summer in the Trade Policy Review, which was really insightful. And bouncing back on what you just said about differential treatments, I was wondering, while China benefited greatly from that differential treatment for development, how do you perceive the WTO should also address limiting at some point or changing the status of those kind of countries? Thank you very much, DG.
Which trade policy review did you work on?
USA.
USA, okay.
Okay. Over here, please.
Good afternoon, DG. My name is Theo Carlos Asotie. I'm an LLM student from Nigeria. Igbo Kwenu.
Kwezueno.
Yes. Thank you very much, DG. First, I must quickly say I enjoyed your book, which is titled Fighting Corruption is Dangerous. It gave a very real insight into what happens within government circles, which more government officials would write about their experiences in governance. Straight to my question really is, you've spoken a lot and emphasized on the internal, what African countries or smaller countries should do in terms of having a say at the table when it comes to global trade. I wanted to, seek your opinion in terms of what are some of the low-hanging fruits, quick actions that these smaller countries can take to begin to, come up to the table and have a say in issues like this. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, so one is the functioning of the WTO itself, and the second has to do with what can small countries do to be effective.
Yeah, these are really great questions coming from your audience. On special and differential treatment for China, this is probably one of the things that irks the United States the most. That, if you call yourself a developing country at the WTO, you have access to special and differential treatment. First of all, when I arrived at the WTO, I have to confess to you, I had spent a career in the World Bank. At the World Bank, we have categories for countries. We know whether you're a low-income country defined by your per capita income. We know whether you're a lower middle income, and so on, and upper middle income. I came to the WTO and there was no such thing. At the WTO, those who created it said you could call yourself whatever you liked, whether it's developing or developed. And now all those who created the system are speaking of WTO does this and WTO does that. Well, there is no WTO. WTO is made up of its members, and they made the rules. So when they say that, I said, don't look at me or the Secretariat. You guys created this, and I was astonished. So we have this convention whereby a country can, a member joining can designate itself. So you have some very high-income countries. Now, so we need to look at that. When I looked at it, I said, finally, at the end of the day, it's not what you call yourself, it's what does it give you access to at the WTO. So those countries that are tending to upper middle income and so on, should they have access to special and differential treatment? There are many members who feel that they should not, and that this confers on them undue privileges. This is one of the key issues for the reform. So I need to take these people back with me to Geneva because they seem to know what reforms we need to do. So this is one of the issues I hope we'll be tackling in the reform and saying, how should we handle this? Who should have access to special and different? Don't mind what they call themselves. China, after all, is a $13,000 per capita nominal GDP compared to United States that is 82,000. If they want to call themselves developing, leave them alone. But that's not the issue for me. The issue is, what does that title allow them to do at the WTO? And if we can find a way of saying, listen, at this level, you shouldn't have access. You can call yourself whatever name, but don't have access. That's what we need to debate and the reforms we need to make. And then I think that's it. Oh, low-hanging fruit for small countries. Very good question. I feel that there's a unique opportunity for small countries and poor developing countries now, because we're actually saying that the dependencies we see in the world system and what we went through during the pandemic, where we saw supply chains were vulnerable and hit, means that we need to build better global resilience by diversifying supply chains. And it should not just be China plus one. You know, China plus Vietnam. I always tell them, why not plus Bangladesh, for instance? Why not plus Ghana, you know, or Nigeria, or, you know, Kenya, or some of Brazil? Let us decentralize supply chains. And small countries, some of them can be suitable for these supply chains, by the way. You know, pharmaceutical companies also look at the type of environment. Small countries can be part of this pharma supply chain, because sometimes you need to spread supply chains, not just in one place, but through multiple countries. So that's one. Second, critical mineral supply chains. I find a lot of smaller countries in Africa have the critical minerals that are required for EV batteries and all that. It is not good enough now for others to come invest and just dig up the soil and take it somewhere, which is what happens a lot of times. There's an opportunity for them to add value in place, and we can do the supply chain through several countries in the continent, all the way to EV batteries. That's what we should be bidding for. Green hydrogen, agro-allied, you know, China needs to move up the food chain in some of these things, and productivity there, you know, for some of these kinds of industries is also declining. So you need to find, because costs are going up, you need to decentralize even from China to other areas. Why not to some of the smaller, poorer countries? So I see great opportunity in some of these. It's not going to fall in your lap. If you're a country, if you're a leader, you need to show you're actively doing all the things that are good to attract investment. By the way, I just want to share with you one very nice thing. We are negotiating an investment facilitation for development instrument at the WTO. It's a plurilateral, meaning it's not everyone. 127 countries are negotiating it, and it's designed to sweep away the bureaucracy in front of investment, especially in poor countries where investors keep telling me, oh, there's a high-risk perception. But if we put this instrument in place, it will help these countries lower risk and manage it. And then those are the kinds of things we can do to help poor countries to do better and attract investment.
Well, thank you so much. This has been an extraordinary conversation. I'm afraid we are out of time, so my apologies to those who have lined up. There is tremendous interest and expertise in our community. I hope you will have access to it when you come back, and we can share ideas for you to support the multilateral system and the very complex world we're living in that has to navigate forward in a productive way. Please join me in thanking the Director General for an extraordinary conversation. Thank you so much.